the first translation into a different language, so it's kind of a big deal for me, because it's not easy to translate a book about reading, because the texts are so important and so much of the discussion is about texts in English. So it's a tremendous achievement by everyone at Optus, and I'm really honored by it. One is that when I was a teacher, I was an English teacher, and so it's always been an area of interest of mine. Two, I have 3 children, and so while I've been working in schools trying to think about how to make schools better for all children, it's something I work on every day with my own children, reading to them especially, because I think that reading is the first among equals, the most important thing that we can teach our children. And third, I think that there are some difficult reflections that we have to do as a sector in the United States. I think that we have done some good work in building schools around the idea that all kids can achieve and that kids cut off from opportunity can still achieve great things in the classroom. But if you look at our results, we are twice as good at math as we are at reading. And I think that we have to acknowledge that it's possible that we don't understand it enough and that there are things we need to change about how we do reading. Reading culture is changing very rapidly in this country, and I think it probably is in Chile as well, and in Latin America as well. And the primary way that it's changing is that reading is it's in danger. It's being driven out by the phone, by the device, by screens. And even when we read differently. We read distracted by the screens that are around us, or with brains that have been shaped by constant distracted reading on screens that are around us. And so deep, contemplative, meditative reading, joyful, shared reading among people, those things are disappearing. And so reading deeply, insulated from technology, together as a group is becoming more and more important, because written text is fighting a death struggle against electronic text. And unless we're intentional to it in the way that we teach, it's going to lose. Close reading to us is the set of strategies that students use when a text that they're reading is above their comfort level in difficulty. And to us, this is one of the most important things that you learn to do. You learn to struggle with the text. If you want to go to university, you have to be able to read books that are not leveled for you, that are uncomfortable, that are challenging. Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Autumn of the Patriarch is 300 pages long in 2 sentences. It's designed to put you in a position to struggle. And so, number one, students have to be comfortable struggling and know that they have tools that they can use when they're struggling. And you read different when you're struggling. And so we have to prepare them for this. And close reading are the tools that we give them to begin to engage a text that is difficult for them. And I think that there are 2 ways that we see teachers doing it. One is what we call a lesson, where you engage a passage from a text or an article or a longer section of text for maybe the duration of a class. But we also think that it's very powerful to do very short pieces of close reading throughout a lesson. We might call this a close reading burst. And so you come across a sentence that's challenging and rich and hard to decipher and hard to make sense of, and maybe you spend 10 minutes just looking at that sentence, paraphrasing it, or talking about how it might be different if this word replaced that word. We think that's one of the most powerful ways to develop an ear for the decisions that writers make while they're writing. So we call that a close reading burst. It always reminds me of the cellist Yo-Yo Ma when he describes learning to play cello as a youngster. His parents would have him practice for 5 minutes at a time, only 5 minutes, with the idea that he was gonna practice playing deeply and thoughtfully, with deep focus that he wasn't yet ready to sustain for an hour or 2 hours, just for a short period of time, and then stop. And therefore he would learn to play with the greatest possible focus. So I think there's a deep power in students reading very deeply a sentence for 10 minutes and thinking deeply about how meaning is made in this sentence and how it would be different if this word replaced that word, that one change. That helps them to develop an ear for things like satire and irony and all the things that we love about the books that we read. Something very powerful about struggling together and watching other people struggle, especially people who you admire, watching them struggle. It's a very powerful experience for a student to say, here are the students I admire most among my peers, and look at them struggling with this text. That means that this must be the most normal experience. And I also think that in the moment of struggle, it's an ideal time to listen to other people. And to me, shared texts are very important. We live, I think, in an increasingly atomized and isolated world where people can examine only information that agrees with what they already think. And oftentimes we replicate that in the classroom. We say everyone gets their own book and gets to read it on their own and interpret it however they want to. To me, it's very powerful to be in a room and hear how other people read the book and be forced to engage with different interpretations and be amazed and impressed by those interpretations and realize there are things you didn't see, or to struggle to refute them because you don't agree with them. But to me, in an increasingly atomized social world, shared text in the classroom is even more important. So there is an aspect of close reading that I think is especially valuable when it's done as a large group. One, I think that the idea that reading is as much knowledge-driven as skill-driven, that many of the things that we think about, at least in this country, as transferable skills, inferencing main idea are not transferable skills. And so we have to be attentive to building background knowledge and infusing knowledge in our texts as we read them. Number two, I think vocabulary, the deep importance of vocabulary is maybe the single most important form of background knowledge. And so teaching vocabulary from a knowledge-driven standpoint as opposed to a skill-driven standpoint. Skill-driven teaching of vocabulary, which is very popular in this country, would be, what can you guess this word means from the context clues? Anyone know what they think this word means? And knowledge-driven would be, here's the meaning of the word, let's apply it. Well, if the word is tyrant, could a tyrant ever be gracious? Could a tyrant ever be kind? Let's discuss and apply the word in 1,000 settings. Do you have to be a king or a queen to be a tyrant? Are all tyrants bad? Right? Constantly experiencing using a word, once you have the definition, to me is knowledge-based vocabulary, and I think that's really important. And then my third idea might be a piece of close reading, which is what I would call sensitivity analysis, which is just the power of taking a great sentence and changing one or two words about it and asking students how it reads differently with those very small changes. Because I think that is what prepares students to be able to understand how language works in a text, which is very, very important. Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't want to name a number. I think it's different with every teacher in every subject area and every grade. I think rather than even thinking about how many texts, I think it's really the power to me is in the synergy of moving back and forth between fiction and nonfiction regularly. The upside, the good news about the way that technology has changed our lives is it's so easy now to constantly read a novel and then jump to even a very short nonfiction article to illuminate and bring out the depth of it. To me, that teaches students to read nonfiction in a way where they're motivated and they're reading it authentically, but it also brings life to the fiction and makes the fiction richer and explains why you'd want to read nonfiction. And so in some ways, the constant interaction between fiction and nonfiction is as important, the way that they interact is as important as the amount of each. If you know what I mean. In other words, reading a nonfiction article and asking, how does this change the way you see the text? How does this change the way we see the novel? What does this add to what we see in the novel? I would rather have a teacher spend 10 minutes reading really high value nonfiction and relating it to the novel than 20 or 30 minutes on nonfiction that is not related to the overall, to the novel that we're reading to the fiction. Absolutely. One of the things we know when we're working on we're trying to build our curriculum right now, reading curriculum. We're excited about it because we've learned so much writing it. But one of the things we notice is that with younger students, we like to adapt the texts, rewrite them, edit them, choose the most useful passages so we can provide the most powerful information to young students. Part of being an older student, though, is navigating through the parts of the text that are not as germane to, or not as valuable to what you want to study at that time. So with older students, we think giving them the text, giving them nonfiction texts, less edited, less selected, so that they have to find the most important parts is an important experience for them. So in many ways, the presentation of the text is different. But yes, absolutely, the type of text changes depending on the age of the students in the subject. So in my ideal classroom, there's a lot of reading and a lot of students reading aloud with each other and getting in touch with the joy, the humor, the pathos of texts, partly by hearing their classmates read it aloud with passion as well. And then a lot of students writing about the text in very short, intensive bursts where they try to capture some idea that in that moment is very important to them and the best writing that they can create.